His mission was to stay on a remote island for a full year. For this, the government had dispatched a team of explorers across the South Atlantic Ocean. Among them was David, a weather officer whose job was to gather meteorological data on the island. He was then to wait there for exactly 1 year until the authorities sent in a rescue party. So they dropped him off with plenty of food and supplies and then sailed away. After several days at sea, they reached the island and used a small canoe-like boat to disembark. Not a single bird could be seen. On the shore stood a lighthouse and a small house where David was to live. They checked the house first, but it was empty. It appeared as if Robert, the officer who'd been stationed there before him, had suddenly vanished. His belongings lay scattered about as if he'd fled in terror. David and the captain then went to inspect the lighthouse. But what they saw made them shiver. Someone had placed sharp wooden stakes all around it as if trying to barricade themselves inside. They knocked several times, but there was no answer. Finally, the captain broke in through force and found a man inside. He introduced himself as Gruner. When asked about Robert, Gruner curtly replied, "He's dead. He went into the sea and never returned." The captain was taken aback. He offered David the choice to return with the ship or stay behind. But he refused. He intended to complete his assignment and provide accurate weather data. And besides, he thought, who would stop him? The captain, still uneasy, handed him a rifle. "This place doesn't feel right," he said. "If anything happens, shoot." Then the ship departed, leaving David alone with his duty. That night, while settling in, he discovered Robert's diary. It contained strange notes about weird creatures that prowl around the island. Some passages were incomplete, others confusing. Odd sketches of inhuman beings filled the margins. There was even a photograph of Robert's wife tucked between the pages. It was evident that something unusual was happening on the island. But what? Exhaustion eventually pulled him into sleep. The next morning, David resumed his work. While near the shore, he noticed stones arranged in peculiar patterns with seashells placed deliberately in between. It felt unnatural. Gazing back toward the lighthouse through his telescope, he saw Gruner standing with another figure. But when he blinked, the person was gone. Shaken, he dismissed it as a trick of his imagination. That night, someone knocked at his door. Expecting Gruner, he called out, but no reply came. As he approached with a lantern, strange whispers filled his ears. Sounds like voices, yet not quite human. Then, to his horror, a clawed hand pushed itself through the gap beneath the door. It wasn't human at all. Heart pounding, David fled into the basement, hiding in the shadows. Through a crack, he watched as a gaunt, hairy creature with glowing red eyes slipped inside. It was followed by another, then another. They were all searching for him. When one of them finally spotted him and lunged, David thrust a knife into its eye. It shrieked and disappeared into the darkness. In the morning, David found the diary again. The entries were indeed true. Sleep was impossible now. He spent his days locked in the basement, watching the creatures lumber past. Sometimes their guttural voices echoed in the night. Occasionally, they would drag something large into the house, accompanied by the sickening squelch of flesh being torn apart. What did they do? How long would they keep this up? He couldn't possibly stay there for an entire year. He considered escaping, but the boat was gone. The creatures must have destroyed it. So he waited, hoping the rescue party would come sooner than expected. He was too afraid to leave the basement, but hunger gnawed at him. He tried drinking rainwater, but thirst turned to horror when he realized it tasted metallic, like blood. And then it happened again. The scratching at the door, the blood-curdling screams, and the slithering shapes. One managed to get a hold of him, but just as it dragged him toward the door, he sank his teeth into its arm. They fought, man and monster, until dawn. David won, but barely. The lighthouse keeper's warning echoed in his ears. He went into the sea and never returned. Hadn't Gruner mentioned anything in his diary? David descended into despair. Would he suffer the same fate as Robert? Was he doomed to die on the island with those monsters? Or would the rescue party arrive in time? The next morning, David found strange, circular tracks in the sand leading back to the sea. Now he understood why Gruner had fortified the lighthouse with spikes. These creatures came from the ocean. Seeking safety, David begged Gruner to let him inside, but the man refused, dousing the ground with water to drive him away. Determined, David fortified his own house with wooden barricades and set up piles of old papers soaked in oil to ignite if attacked. In a chest, he discovered a cache of ammunition. Armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol, he waited for nightfall. As darkness fell, he spotted dozens of the creatures emerging from the waves. They gathered around his gate, but when they reached out to touch it, the electric fence jolted them, throwing some back into the sea. Those that didn't retreat quickly regrouped and tried again, but the same thing happened. Seeing an opening, David opened fire, killing several. His bullets tore through the creatures, spraying blood and ichor across the sand. The wounded ones screeched and retreated, allowing the uninjured to surge forward. Firing wildly, David killed several more, but it wasn't enough. They kept coming, wave after wave. Suddenly, the creatures stopped their assault, sensing danger. A massive shape emerged from the water, blocking the light of the moon. It roared, whipping its tail and tentacles through the air. Startled, the smaller creatures scattered. The enormous monster lumbered toward David's house, reared up on its hind legs, and smashed its huge fist against the wooden barricade. David, terrified, backed away from the creature. With a deafening crash, the beast smashed through his barricade, sending splinters flying. Adrenaline surging, David dodged behind a barrel as the creature charged him, its jaws agape, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Just as it lunged, David ignited the oil-soaked papers. Flames erupted, forcing the creature to recoil. More flames meant more pain. The creature let out a heart-wrenching screech and staggered back into the sea. Panting heavily, David watched as the smaller creatures, guided by the massive one, retreated into the darkness. Exhausted, he slumped to his knees, realizing he had survived the night. But by dawn, his house was reduced to ashes. Injured and exhausted, he knew he could not survive without shelter. The next day, he ambushed Gruner at the well. "Give me water," he demanded, pointing his gun at the man. Gruner, surprised by David's audacity, stared back defiantly. "Why should I?" he asked. At that moment, one of the creatures attacked David, but before he could kill it, Gruner stepped in. "Stop! This one is mine!" he barked. David turned to see Gruner grab the creature by the neck and drag it toward the lighthouse. "What are you going to do with her?" David asked. Gruner looked back, his eyes gleaming with a strange light. "This one is special," he said cryptically. Then he disappeared inside the lighthouse, leaving David with more questions than answers. Later that night, as David struggled to tend the fire, Gruner approached. "I need your help," he said, holding out a piece of fish. David eyed the fish warily. "What do you want me to do with it?" he asked. "Take it to her," Gruner replied, nodding toward the corner where the captured creature cowered. Reluctantly, David did as he was told. The creature flinched when he approached, but when it saw the fish, it hesitantly reached out and took it from him. As she ate, David noticed something strange. Her skin seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Suddenly she stopped, as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met, and for a moment, David felt a strange connection between them. Before he could react, Gruner barked, "Get out!" David left the lighthouse feeling confused and uneasy. The next morning, David awoke to find the female creature tending to his wounded hand. Her touch sent a jolt of energy through him, and his hand began to heal at a speed that defied nature. Astonished, he watched as she caressed his wound, and soon it was as though it had never been injured. Over the next few days, the creature continued to heal David, and he began to believe that she possessed extraordinary powers. Despite Gruner's warnings, David couldn't help but sneak into the corner and steal small bites of the fish. And every night the female creature would silently watch him eat. And David said, "I will make you a boat." And he did. It was a tiny vessel made of fish bones and seaweed, too small to take him anywhere, yet big enough for Anarius to climb into and out of. She was so happy with the gift that she took him to see something truly amazing. In a hidden cove, under a tangle of vines and creepers, lay a big boat. It was half buried in the sand, but Anarius, agile as she was, managed to climb in and out of it without any effort. The boat was seaworthy and large enough to carry both of them. "Can we go now?" asked David. But Arius shook her head. "There's something you must understand," she said. "We may not look like it, but we are truly part of this island. We are tied to it by an ancient magic. Unless that magic is broken, we cannot leave." David looked at her, confused. Suddenly, he heard Gruner's voice behind them. "So you found my secret boat, did you? Thought you could escape with her, did you, you dirty traitor?" David turned and saw Gruner striding towards them, his face twisted with anger. "You stay out of this, Gruner," said David. But Gruner paid him no heed. Instead, he pushed Ananias aside and climbed into the boat. Then, to David's horror, he drew a knife and slashed at the boat, damaging it beyond repair. "I won't allow you to take her away," said Gruner, his eyes blazing with hatred. David felt a surge of anger, but before he could do anything, Gruner leaped out of the boat and grabbed him by the throat. "You're a dead man," Gruner hissed, lifting him off his feet. Just then, Ananias let out a blood-curdling scream and charged at Gruner. Startled by her sudden attack, Gruner dropped David to the ground and turned to face her. But Ananias was upon him in an instant, and with a swift kick sent him sprawling back into the boat. Before either of them could react, the boat tipped over, sending both Gruner and David crashing into the shallow water. Gruner surfaced, sputtering and enraged, but before he could right the boat, Ananias was upon him again. With a powerful swipe of her tail, she capsized the boat once more. This time, it stayed that way. Ananias climbed out, dripping but triumphant. Then she turned to David and offered him a hand to help him out. As David pulled himself up onto the beach, he realized how much he had changed since arriving on the island. Once a prisoner, he had become a rebel, then a fighter, and now he had rescued his own people. Maybe he wasn't so different from Ananias after all. Over the next few days, the horde of creatures stopped their nightly attacks. Had they accepted their defeat? David hoped so. He looked at Ananias, who was perched on the edge of the cliff, watching the sea. Her people were gone, and she was alone. David knew he couldn't leave her behind. So he did the only thing he could think of. He approached her slowly, then took her hand, and together they watched the sunrise over the ocean. David, the hero of our story, wakes up on a mysterious island and finds himself trapped there against his will. He soon realizes that he's not alone. There are others on the island, survivors of a shipwreck like him. And they're not exactly thrilled about sharing the island. When David confronts Gruner about it, the man admits he already knew. He knew because he was no ordinary man. He was one of the very few humans who had managed to survive on the island for years. He explained that long ago, another wreck had reached the island, but the creatures, the ones that ruled this place, had slaughtered everyone. Their ship carried weapons and dynamite, but a storm sank it. And ever since, Gruner had been plotting to destroy the island, to take his revenge on the creatures that had taken everything from him. That's when an idea sparked in David's mind. If someone could reach the sunken ship, perhaps they could recover the explosives and use them to blow up the island. Gruner refused. He refused because he was afraid of what the creatures might do to him, to anyone who dared to defy them. But David wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had already faced the creatures and lived to tell the tale. So donning a diving suit, he plunged into the depths, searching for the explosives that could end his nightmare. It was a desperate gamble, but fate was on his side. He found the crates of dynamite and with great effort, barely escaped alive. From then on, he and Ananias, the woman he had rescued from the island, began laying traps of dynamite around the lighthouse. They worked day and night, driven by the hope of finally escaping this cursed island. Months passed. Winter came and the creatures mysteriously disappeared. But as the first buds of spring appeared, they came back. And with their return, the horror began anew. Gruner, suspicious as ever, accused Ananias of warning them and tortured her. But David, furious at Gruner's callousness, intervened. He realized that Gruner's hatred for the creatures had blinded him to the possibility of escape. So David and Ananias devised a plan so daring that it could either lead to their freedom or their deaths. They decided to leave the lighthouse gate open, to lure the creatures in, to lead them straight into a trap. And Ananias, with her knowledge of the creatures, would climb to the top of the lighthouse and let out a piercing cry, a distress call that would bring the entire horde crashing down on them. It was a risky strategy, but it was their only hope. As the sun began its slow descent, Ananias climbed to the top of the lighthouse. She took a deep breath and let out a heart-wrenching scream. The sea erupted. The creatures, drawn by her cry, rushed toward the lighthouse, surging forward in a terrifying wave. They crashed into the gate, slamming their bodies against the wood as if trying to batter it down. Gruner, his face pale with a mixture of fear and determination, pulled the detonator. But nothing happened. The wires had been disconnected. David, quick on his feet, reattached them just as the creatures burst through the gate. He triggered the explosion. A thunderous blast ripped through the night, killing many creatures at once. But the battle wasn't over. Some creatures, wounded but alive, struggled to their feet and charged toward the lighthouse. Gruner, exhausted and terrified, set off a second blast. Both men were knocked unconscious. When David awoke at dawn, Ananias was gone. He stumbled out of the lighthouse to find a beach littered with dead and wounded creatures. For the first time, he saw them not just as monsters, but as beings with families, bonds, and emotions. A stark reminder of the life that had once thrived on the island. Weeks later, he spotted young sea creatures playing in the waves. He remembered the sacrifice that Arias had made, her wish to be reunited with her kind. In her honor, he built a circle of stones on the shore, placing a small boat within it. It was a gesture of hope, a silent promise that she might one day return, but she never did. And in time, David discovered the final truth. Gruner, the man who had claimed to have been shipwrecked on the island for 12 years, was actually Robert, the original weather officer. He had never left. He had been stranded on the island for much longer than anyone else. He had hidden his identity, preying on the newcomers, manipulating them for his own ends. In the end, Ananias was shown free, finally reunited with her kin in the vast ocean. But David, burdened by his past and haunted by the memories of those he'd lost, remained at the lighthouse, trapped in his eternal prison.